But looking at the church today takes me back to my childhood. Because I actually, if I think about it now, had a very privileged childhood. I grew up in the countryside of Devon and Somerset, which is where I always say God goes on his holidays if he doesn't live there. But in the summer holidays, I used to work on a local farm, tossing hay bales onto trailers, Yeah. Good for the old upper body strength, I can tell you, yeah. And at the end of a hot, sweaty day in the fields, I would look forward to the reward of a slightly illegal glass of cider from the farmer. And he'd let me drive his tractor and his Land Rover around, so I would learn these basic driving skills when I was very young. I'm sure none of that would be allowed today, Colin, would it? No, not in this health and safety regime that everybody has to follow, but It was a wonderful way to grow up. And harvest was a time of huge abundance because we were an agricultural community. So, churches were just stuffed full of vegetables. And we'd usually have an auction at the end to try and get rid of them all, yeah? But you know what I mean. You've seen and you've perhaps been in churches like that in rural areas where there's such joy at bringing all the harvest into the church. It's perhaps only those of us who've sweated a bit in the fields who can really understand that sense of satisfaction at a job completed at harvest time. But it's a bit different today, isn't it? We don't have this same sense of harvest arriving at a particular point. Harvest takes place every day of the year in our global village. If we can't grow the food we want in England within the season, well, we buy it from other parts of the world, don't we? Labourers, like little old me with me pitchfork, well, we're still needed, but not as much. Mechanical systems of picking and harvesting are taking over. No one tosses hay onto trailers anymore. The word harvest, I suggest, doesn't quite have the resonance that it used to have. And yet, at the same time, ironically, the world of nature has perhaps never been more in our minds. We're far more aware than we were in the 1970s, when I grew up, of the interconnected nature of all living things, aren't we? On our TV screens, we witness the destruction of the rainforests, record-breaking temperatures every year. How can you keep breaking records year on year? And forest fires across the globe. We watch the melting of the glaciers and we build our heightened sea walls against the rising of the seas. Ironically, there has never been a time when we have been less connected to the land and yet more affected by it. And I think the last few decades have seen a marked shift in the way we think about God's relationship to creation and harvest too. In a short while, we're going to sing, "We plough the fields and scatter." I hope that's the last hymn this morning, is it? Yeah. Oh, it's the offertory. There you go. So we're going to sing it, yeah. But it is fed and watered by God's almighty hand. I don't suppose any of us really think that the hand of God is pouring a sort of watering can out of the sky, yeah, or digging in the manure, yeah. It's not really what we think. It's a poetic image. In fact, we have far more faith, I think, in the science of weather forecasting than we do the idea of God sending the rain. Despite, I have to say, the number of parishioners who always ask me to pray for good weather when they're having a barbecue or a birthday party. You'll have a word with him upstairs, won't you? Yeah, as though God listens to my prayers for sun and rain. Now, you might think I'm sorry about that. After all, isn't this loss of a faith in God who's going to send rain in response to our prayers, isn't that a dangerous thing for the church? Surely if people stop praying for God, to God for rain or any other need for that matter, the churches will empty. Well, perhaps they will. Or at least they will empty, I suggest, of those people who think of God as a kind of genie, a sort of fairy godmother up in the sky who will grant wishes in return for the right words. My hope, my observation, is that with the advance of our understanding of creation and the harvest, We are in fact growing up like well-nourished plants. Huh? We're moving away from a medieval god in the sky, probably with a big white beard, who granted or refused the wishes of his farmers. And instead we're beginning to glimpse the God who is, hard to put words to God, but something like the energy at the center of the universe, the God who inspires us, the God who leads us through story, through encouragement, through prophetic words, to use our intellects and shape and control our own environments. Instead of a Father Christmas God to whom we cry for solutions to our problems, we're confronted instead with, well, the God of the great Genesis story, for example. The God who creates a beautiful garden and then gives it to his children with the command that we should take care of it. That was my message last week to the Green Festival over at the Pallant Centre. I argued that the stories of religion, from all religions to be fair, give us a framework for action in the face of climate catastrophe. We need to hear the voices of religion and not just of science in tackling the climate catastrophe. I suggested to the Green Conference that they might take up this slogan, take care of the garden. Take care of the garden. I suggested that as a slogan, it has deep religious roots, Christian roots, Jewish roots, Islamic roots, for those who want to excavate them, for that story is common to all three of the Abrahamic faiths. But it also contains a sense of command, a sense of imperative that human beings really need to hear. Take care of the garden. Say it with me. Take care of the garden. Our abuse of the planet doesn't only result in heat stroke and loss of agricultural land to drought and fire. It has huge effects on the populations of countries who are worst affected by those changes. That in turn leads to wars over resources, including many will say, Putin's present war to capture the grain fields of the Ukraine to feed the Russian people. Wars and famine, well, they lead to mass migration as people desperately search for hope in other places. And then such people become targets for modern-day slave traders who will promise desperate migrants lands of milk and honey if they would just step into this van or let me lock you into this cargo container and then be transported around the world. But of course we know what happens, don't we? We know that such people on arrival find that there is no milk and honey after all. Rather, they find that they've been sold into illegal slavery as laborers or factory workers or as sex workers. Can you imagine what it feels like to leave your home and your family, hoping to be able to send them money to tackle the grinding poverty in which they live, but then finding yourself as a slave without any power over your life? The Medaley Trust exists to help such people. When they are liberated, the Medaley Trust helps to get their lives back on track. And that's why we are supporting them today. I hope you can see the connection that I've just made between harvest, the climate catastrophe, and the reality of modern slavery. These things are interlinked. Modern slavery is a direct result of the climate catastrophe and our inability to what? Take care of the garden. Well done, Lynn's awake. I'm glad. At least Lynn. Well done, yeah? So thank you to those of you who have brought gifts for the Medaley Trust today. We do appreciate that it's been a bit of short notice, and some of you may not have picked up what our harvest collection was going to be this year. We're going to send these gifts off or take them to the Medaley Trust in about 3 weeks' time. So if you'd like to bring more gifts next week, or indeed some gifts if you haven't already, please do, or the week after, so that we can bless those victims of modern-day slavery as much as possible. But there is also the alternative of placing money in the basket on that table. And I'll pray for God's blessing on it in a little while. Let me conclude. Personally, I don't mourn the passing of a belief in a weather god, or for that matter, any idea of a God who, in response to the right words, said in the right way, will supply all our needs as a sort of heavenly vending machine. I wonder how many modern slaves pray to such a God only to find that no answer comes. How many people in Bangladesh or in the Pacific Islands pray for relief that never comes as their homes sink beneath the rising seas? Rather, I pray for a new understanding of God. The God who insists on our reality. The God who is the creative heart of all creation. The love that binds us, inspires us, teaches us through prophetic speech and powerful stories, to take care of the garden, to share the bounty that we possess for the good of all. Can I get an amen? Amen. This is the God to whom Jesus directs us in our gospel reading. I wonder if you noticed. After telling his disciples not to worry about food and clothes and drink, he says this: seek first God's kingdom and God's righteousness, and then all these things will be given to you as well. Seek first God's kingdom. Jesus is calling the world to hear the cry of the kingdom. Feed the hungry, welcome the stranger, set the captive free, and take care of the garden. If only humanity would embrace that kind of radical teaching and the radical mythology and the radical commands of the kingdom. If only justice would flow like rivers and the inequities of humanity were washed away. Then, as the prophet Joel said in the reading that Paul gave to us, the threshing floors would be filled with grain. The vats would overflow with new wine and oil. And then you will know that I am the Lord your God, and never again will my people be shamed. Amen? Amen. Amen.